A mochi moment from Mark, who writes, I just want to thank you for making GLP-1s affordable. What would have been over $1,000 a month is just $99 a month with Mochi. Money shouldn't be a barrier to healthy weight. 3 months in, and I have smaller jeans and a bigger wallet. You're the best. Thanks, Mark. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Mark is a Mochi member compensated for his story.
This episode of Voices for Justice is sponsored by Shopify. Starting a business is filled with a lot of what-ifs. What if I fail? What if nobody listens to the podcast? What if nobody cares? It can definitely be hard to get over that doubt and uncertainty, but making that leap was one of the best things I've ever done, and it's great to know that I'm not alone with a business partner like Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Heinz and Mattel to brands just getting started. And I'm telling you, their tools really do feel like you have a business partner. They have hundreds of ready-to-use templates to help build a beautiful online store that matches your brand. You can also get the word out like you have an entire marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And if you get stuck, Shopify is always there to help with their award-winning 24/7 customer service. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/justice. Go to shopify.com/justice. That's shopify.com/justice. Voices for Justice is a podcast that uses adult language and discusses sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including violence, abuse, and murder. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. Today, I am discussing the case of Molly Bish from Warren, Massachusetts. 16-year-old Molly was dropped off by her mother for her 8th day of work as a lifeguard, and only minutes later, she was gone. Her disappearance would spark the largest and most expensive search in Massachusetts history. Through the efforts of her family, Molly's case would also evoke massive changes in the state of Massachusetts, and for families of the missing and crime victims everywhere. This is the case of Molly Bish. The Bish family is originally from Detroit, but moved to Warren, Massachusetts to escape the violent crime of the city. For this episode, I had the chance to speak with Molly's older sister, Heather, who was in her early 20s when Molly went missing. I do have to give a quick shout out to Tim and Lance from Crawlspace Media for introducing me to Heather. Truth be told, after researching her family and speaking with her, she's definitely a personal hero of mine. But here's Heather talking more about this move and their family dynamic.
We actually moved here from Michigan when I was 3 years old. My mom was from Michigan and met my dad in college. And after they had me, there was a murder in their neighborhood, and they thought maybe we should move back to where my dad was from. It's a small town. It's classic kind of case of thinking it's a little bit safer than, the Detroit area. So we moved to Massachusetts when I was 3, and my brother came along shortly thereafter. And Molly came around about 6 years later. She's 6 years younger than me. She was born actually at home in our house. My parents are kind of these sort of old hippies, and it was kind of when I was 6. It was really exciting. But then, your mom goes into labor, it becomes a little scary. But when Molly was born, it was like she was my baby. I had a brother for so long, and all he wanted to do was play with trucks and get in the dirt, and I was really sick of that. So I was so excited to have Molly. I wanted her to be just like me, and I imagined, having a best friend. And as we grew up, we had those typical, sister fights over clothes, and she wanted us, my friends, when I was an adolescent, to go play Barbies with her. And she was always, trying to get in and play with us. And, we had those typical fights. But, Molly, when she was getting older into her teenage years and I was in college, we became closer. You kind of grow into that relationship as you get older, and you do become more like best friends. And so Molly came to visit me at college a few times. I didn't really go away that far. I was about an hour away, and she would stay some weekends with me. And we remained close, even though I was in college for 4 years before she disappeared. Um, I had moved back that year home and was unexpectedly, surprisingly pregnant. So my daughter was born 11 months before Molly disappeared, and Molly was her godmother. And um, we actually inherited our grandmother's house, which is right down the street from my parents' home. So it was really convenient when you're a young mother to live that close to your family. And Molly would come down and feed Michaela and play with her. And in fact, that morning that she disappeared, she stopped in because we had had a little stomach bug and hadn't seen her for a couple of days, and she had missed Michaela. And so she had come by that morning right before she left. And I'm always so grateful for that because I had a chance to hug her and she had a chance to, spend a little more time with Michaela. So that those moments were, it's those tiny moments you don't realize are so important to you, hindsight. And so, we kind of grew up in a small family. It was just my brother and my sister and my parents. My grandmother lived down the street. We had an uncle that lived nearby, but it was really just us. So our holidays were quite small, and we were very close. We went to each other's soccer games and horseback riding shows, and um, we were just. Of course, this is before Facebook and cell phones, so you didn't have as much distractions. Um, but yeah, we were a very close family, and I guess that's why when Molly went missing and the police didn't look for her, and they later said, "Oh, she ran away," or she's left her job. We knew that wasn't what Molly would do. We knew her character. We knew. I mean, I knew that my sister wouldn't walk around without her shoes on. So right there, I was totally freaked out when I saw her shoes at the pond that day. So I guess that's sort of how we grew up. My parents, again, they were kind of these old hippies, and they believed in even if you just had a little something extra, you should help another person. And my mom was a teacher, my dad was a probation officer. We were really middle class. We lived in a little ranch house. We didn't have much extra, but my mom would buy extra mittens and hats, and we would give them to the kids who didn't have any. And so we grew up sort of learning that's how you operate in life is you take care of each other. And I think that's really contributed to how we've continued Molly's legacy after she's been gone.
Warren is a pretty small town with only about 5,000 residents, but it's known for having excellent schools and a tight-knit community. To John and Maggie Bish, it seemed like a great place to raise their kids.
When Molly disappeared, we didn't really know that this kind of thing would happen. We lived in a small town. We didn't lock our doors. We thought we knew all our neighbors. We thought we were all friends. And the moment that Molly was gone, we started looking around us and thinking, oh, maybe that guy over there doesn't look so friendly, or maybe we don't know our neighbors as well, and maybe Molly's friends aren't really her friends. We looked at everybody, we questioned everybody, and that's a scary place to arrive at because your whole world rocks, and I don't think you ever get the perspective back again that you're safe in any capacity.
Molly's father, John Sr., worked as a probation officer, and her mother, Maggie, worked as an elementary school teacher after Molly, who was the youngest, entered kindergarten. Like Heather briefly mentioned, Molly had two older siblings, Heather, who you just heard from, who was the oldest, and John Sr., who was just a few years older than Molly. Here is Heather describing what Molly was like.
Molly was funny and silly. She actually was diagnosed with ADHD early on in school because she was so active, let's say. But she would be that kid, in outfield picking the daisies and putting them in her hair. Yet she would catch that ball and then get somebody out. She was a very good athlete. She was a very strong swimmer. She played three sports. She helped start the soccer team, the girls' soccer team at our high school. Um, she loved like Forrest Gump and laughing and being silly. She had friends and like we had a really small school. We're from a small town. It was probably 50 to 100 kids in a graduating class, depending on the year. And so there was, you kind of got to know everybody. And Molly just was friends with everybody. She definitely had a weak spot for the underdog. When I was doing my student teaching, she was in high school, and I remember one of the aides, an instructional aide in the classroom that brought like special ed kids into like an art class, telling me that when Molly was in the class with those kids, she would always like welcome them in and make it a big deal and high five them and make them feel included as opposed to sitting in the back of the class, in sort of an exclusionary way. She loved people. She really felt, she was very sensitive. She really felt, when things were happening in the world, and understanding and sort of making sense of that. She really felt, um, you know, very emotional about things. I remember her friends, a couple of her friends had been in a car accident in the April before she disappeared, and she just had such a hard time with that. She was just so, so sad. Um, I wondered how sometimes with the world today, I've wondered how Molly would have handled all this. And I don't know. We often dream about what she would be and how she would be. And um, she loved babies. Molly was funny when she was little. She really loved babies, and she would have to get the real baby clothes. So my mom would take her to a store in the next town and buy real baby clothes. She loved to sing. She loved to make jewelry. She loved her friends. She spent, so many nights in sleepover parties or having her friends over our house. Um, she loved being in love. She had a boyfriend in high school for about 3 years, and he graduated and went to college. And when that happened, she sort of was single for a while, and then she had gotten this new boyfriend who she was dating when she disappeared. But that had only been like a 3-month relationship. Um, she she loved my Michaela. She loved being an aunt. She really looked up to her brother. She wanted to be as good of a baseball player or soccer player as he was. She really was great because she was kind of, I joke about my brother and I are, he's an athlete. I'm sort of a fall up the stairs kind of person. Um, so we're kind of different. He's very good at saving money. I'm the one that buys those shoes and eats the cake, and so Molly was a good mix of both of us, and that was really fun to see develop in her. And like I said, we were just starting that sort of grown up relationship, and I miss not having. I just imagine that having a sister would be like having a built-in best friend. Especially a little sister. You get to just tell them what to do, and they'll follow you around, and that's how it's supposed to be. Um, so I had hoped that that's, what would have happened. I imagined it would have been, and I still miss her every day.
Molly excelled in pretty much every area, but she especially loved sports. She played basketball, soccer, and softball. She was also on the swim team and was an excellent swimmer. In the year 2000, when Molly was 16, her brother John was leaving his job as a lifeguard at Cummings Pond and offered to train Molly to take his place. She was thrilled, but also took the job very seriously. John taught her everything about this new job. He taught her how to use the police radio. They use this every single day to check in with the police and for emergencies. He also taught her how to clean the beach, get the first aid ready, how to check the water, look for snakes, all of that. Cummings Pond was and still is a pretty popular area for locals. It even has a 4.9 out of 5 stars rating on Google to this day. Basically, it's this man-made lake at the end of a dead-end road that is surrounded by these thick wooded areas. Outside of the pond, there are a ton of hiking trails and places to take ATVs. So there were always hikers, people walking their dogs, and bike cops that would patrol the trails. Since John Jr. worked at the pond previously, continued to swim there pretty much every morning, and the entire family was familiar with the area, it seemed like Molly taking his place was a natural fit. On the morning of Monday, June 26, 2000, at approximately 10 a.m., Maggie drops off Molly for her 7th day of work as a lifeguard. When Maggie pulls up, Molly says goodbye, jumps out of the car, and heads towards her station to get to work. But Maggie doesn't leave just yet, because she sees this man with salt and pepper hair and a mustache smoking a cigarette in a white car. In interviews, she stated that she just had this mama bear feeling, that she didn't want to leave Molly alone with this guy. So Maggie gets out of the car and stays with Molly for a while she gets her station organized. Maggie also mentions to Molly that she was a little concerned about there being so many men around the area. But Molly just kind of blows this off, telling her mom that it was fine and it was just a bunch of fishermen around the area. Eventually, Maggie does start to feel a little bit better and goes back to the car to leave, but the man is still there, doing nothing in his car but smoking a cigarette. So Maggie just kind of stalls in her car until the guy leaves, just pretending to be busy. Although she felt that something was wrong in her gut, she rationalizes with herself that she was probably just being overprotective. On this day, Molly completes her full shift without incident. This episode of Voices for Justice is sponsored by Chewy. If you have pets, you probably know about Chewy, and you also know that when they say that they have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy, they're not messing around. To keep them happy, Chewy has over 100,000 products from all the brands my pets love at prices I love. To keep them healthy, Chewy offers pet prescriptions, pet insurance, telehealth vet visits, and they're even rolling out vet clinics across the country. I've been shopping with them for a very long time. And in addition to the auto-ship feature that gets the dog's food to them every single month, I also love to experiment with different treats. But I'm a bit picky. For me, it has to be high quality with simple ingredients. I recently picked up treats from Shepherd Boy Farms that are 100% just chicken breast. Popcorn and Heber are already obsessed. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. And right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. That's chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney to save $20 on your first order with free shipping. chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details.
At DSW, we ask the important questions, like, what shoes are you going to wear? Whether you're prepping for wedding season, festival season, or just planning the ultimate vacay, the right shoes can make or break an RSVP. So own the moment. You've got big plans, and we've got just the shoes. At the perfect price, of course. Get ready to get ready with Designer Shoe Warehouse. Head to your DSW store or dsw.com today, and let us surprise you.
The next day, now Tuesday, June 27th, Maggie gets a call that one of Molly's teammates was in a very serious car accident and is in critical condition. So Maggie crawls into Molly's bed that morning to break the news to her and just kind of love on her, telling her that everything would be okay. Molly is obviously pretty shaken up, but she decides to go to work anyway. This day was the first day of swimming lessons, and she knew how important it was that she be there. So Molly gets up, gets dressed, and out the door. Before going to the pond, Maggie and Molly stop at a convenience store to pick up some water and make their way to the police station to pick up the two-way radio that she used each morning to check in and report any emergencies. It's important to note here that this is really the only form of communication that Molly would have while at the pond. She didn't have a cell phone and there was no payphone on site. They get to Cummings Pond around 10 a.m. That morning, there was a truck on site and a few workers delivering sand for the beach. And in a few minutes, there would be a ton of parents and kids showing up for the swim lessons. So Maggie feels comfortable leaving Molly. They both say, "I love you," and Molly runs out of the car to her 8th day of work. Molly would never check in with the police that morning, as was the normal protocol. But apparently, this didn't seem to alarm anyone. About 20 minutes later, the first swimmers start to arrive, and one of the moms realizes that Molly wasn't at her station. It's important to note here that there was no actual lifeguard tower like you might see at the beach or at a public pool, but instead, it was pretty much just a beach chair. The beach chair was obviously empty. But next to the chair was Molly's water bottle from the convenience store, along with her flip-flops, whistle, police radio, and an open first aid kit. No one seems to really question why Molly is gone. They just kind of start swim lessons with this mother having taken Molly's place. After about an hour or so, this mom is like, okay, well, I need to leave now. I guess I better tell someone that there's no lifeguard here. So she calls Molly's boss, Ed Fett, the head of the Parks Commission, to say that there was no lifeguard on duty. Ed gets to the pond to confirm, he rummages around in the first aid kit, and around noon, he calls the police on the radio to tell them that Molly was missing. Unfortunately, the Warren Police Department doesn't take action right away, and they wait about an hour to see if Molly might just show back up. It wouldn't be until 1 p.m. that Maggie received the call from the police chief that Molly was missing. She realizes immediately that something was wrong. So Maggie calls Heather, who lives right down the street, and says, get to the pond now. But before Heather can even get to the pond, she sees her mother flagging her down in the street and says, we need to go to the police station. When they get there, they speak about Molly, and they try to get a hold of John Sr., who is driving around seeing his clients who were on probation. It was obviously pretty chaotic at this point. Heather starts going to all of Molly's friends' houses. She also calls the hospital where her friend was in the ICU to ask if she was there. And she goes to Molly's boyfriend's house, but no one has seen or heard from Molly. The police are trying to calm everyone down, saying that Molly probably just left with some friends, maybe they were off doing drugs in the woods, or maybe Molly just ran away. But her family immediately knew that Molly wouldn't leave her post, especially on the first day of swimming lessons and without her shoes. The thing is, the Warren Police Department had never really dealt with a case like Molly's, so they call in the state police to assist. Since Molly's family was insisting that she wouldn't just leave and that none of her friends had seen her or heard from her, at this point the fire and police department start to speculate that maybe Molly drowned, and that's why her shoes were still on the beach. But again, Molly's family is like, absolutely not. Molly is an excellent swimmer and an athlete. They just found it extremely difficult to believe that Molly could have drowned. Despite this, John Jr. actually dives into the water and begins looking for Molly himself. He swam this pond every morning and was confident that if Molly was in that water, he'd find her. John wouldn't stop looking for Molly in the water until the police physically pulled him out. They do send in dive teams to the water, and eventually the police come around and decide that they should probably search for Molly outside of the water as well. This would ultimately become the largest search in the history of the state of Massachusetts. They search for her all day, and when it gets dark, they bring in these huge lights to keep searching, but they come up with nothing. In the following days and weeks, they brought in hundreds of officers and trained volunteers. They brought in dogs, more dive teams, people on horseback, ATVs, sonar equipment, helicopters, bloodhounds, and even turkey vultures. In my interview with Heather, she pointed out that although there was this massive search effort for Molly, no one was really assessing the scene along with her behaviors to try to figure out what happened. Molly was a very responsible 16-year-old who left most of her worldly possessions at home, including some uncashed checks and her driver's license. Plus, Molly was barefoot in a bathing suit, and none of her friends had seen her. So the thought of her running away, or that she was just doing drugs in the woods, was pretty outlandish to her family. In addition to this, the scene seemed to indicate that there could be foul play involved. Let's break it down, starting with the sandals. We know that Molly was barefoot, but it's important to note that her family has stated that she was notorious for hating the feeling of the earth under her feet, especially anything squishy between her toes. So voluntarily walking into the woods or anywhere but the beach barefoot seemed highly unlikely to those who knew her. Next is the open first aid kit. If Molly was alone, waiting for swimmers, why would she have opened up the first aid kit? If she was injured to the point where she felt like she needed first aid and to leave her post, that was exactly what the police radio was for. But Molly never checked in that morning, which again was protocol, and she never called in any type of injury. I and many others think a very likely scenario was that someone approached Molly stating that they were hurt. Molly gets up, leaving the whistle, water bottle, radio, and her shoes in place. She then grabs the first aid kit, opens it up to get supplies, and that's when she's grabbed by someone. Unfortunately, by the time that the police considered the area to be a crime scene, it was beyond contaminated. The mother had taken Molly's post in the chair, and there were a ton of kids and parents walking all around the beach, even before the first responders arrived. There were fingerprints all over the radio, all over the first aid kit. It was a mess. So they weren't able to gather much from the scene. The bloodhounds were able to track Molly's scent from the pond up to a nearby cemetery. What's important to note here about this is that from the cemetery, you can actually kind of see down to the pond area. So it's entirely possible that someone was at the cemetery, saw that Molly was alone, and decided to take her. Maybe even the man in the white car that Maggie saw the day before Molly went missing. Maggie describes this man to the police as being in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a mustache. Ultimately, 2 sketches are made. The more widely used sketch was created by Jean Boylan, who famously created the sketch of the Unabomber, and it has a lot more detail. She actually spent 9 hours with Maggie Bish to create this sketch. It shows the ruffling of his brow when he looked at Maggie, there's a lot of character around the eyes, and he's holding a cigarette. Maggie's encounter with this man was taken very seriously by the police. They set up a roadblock and asked every single person if they saw anyone in a white vehicle near the pond. Several people actually noted seeing a suspicious man in a white vehicle in the area. Most notably, the workers in the cemetery that overlooks Cummings Pond remember seeing a man and a vehicle matching the description at the cemetery in the days before Molly went missing. Obviously, the police think that there's a pretty good chance that this guy could be their guy, and they begin to circulate the sketch and get tips from all over the country. These tips turn into leads and thus turn into a ton of persons of interest to investigate. To be honest, this is where I really struggled with this episode. Going through each and every person of interest that has been named in this case, going through every person of interest that matches the sketch or was in the area, could be an entire series in itself. So if you are interested in diving deeper into the mass amounts of people that they were looking at in this case, you can get lost for hours on Google or newspapers.com. Again, the search was just so broad. The district attorney's office would even order a search of 125 white cars in the area, but they find nothing. Of course, the police do look into the family, but they were cleared pretty quickly. After this, they go right to Molly's boyfriend, Steve Lucas. Steve did come from a troubled family. There were some domestic violence issues, and his father sold some weed. Molly actually wasn't even allowed to go to his house because things were so bad. But other than coming from a troubled home, there didn't seem to be much else pointing to Steve as being the perpetrator. He'd actually been at home sleeping all day. But it is interesting to note that Steve did have a new strange cut on his lip that day. Steve says that he hit his face on something, but at least one of his friends said it was a cold sore. Although Steve was at the pond just 2 hours after Molly went missing and speaking to her family, some investigators say that they find it odd that Steve didn't appear to be participating in any of the searches for Molly. However, it's important to note that Steve did comply with and pass a polygraph test. He has also never been named a suspect in this case. The Bish family doesn't believe that Steve could have taken Molly, but the police go for him so hard that to this day, Heather considers Steve to be the second largest victim in Molly's case. He was a kid with a rough home life without any parents to help him navigate this situation, but the Bishes don't think that he could have harmed Molly. The police also look into Park Commissioner Ed Fetz, whose fingerprints were found on the first aid kit and the police radio. In addition to this, what I find to be super interesting is that according to John Jr., he'd actually seen Ed the morning that Molly went missing at a hardware store, and Ed was buying rope and duct tape. John also found it pretty strange that he never mentioned that Molly was missing when he saw him in the store that day. Ed Fetz would later face unrelated sexual abuse allegations, but has never officially been named a suspect in Molly's case. At this point, the police just start rounding up a ton of local sex offenders and start giving them polygraph tests. Some people pass, some people fail, but nothing leads to finding Molly. They also look into the clients of John Bish Sr., who you might remember was a probation officer, thinking that maybe someone held a grudge against him and came after Molly. But it turns out that he was rather well liked, and this again led to nothing. Molly's case really did captivate the nation. She was featured on America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, Haunting Evidence, and so many other programs. There are also hundreds of sightings of Molly all around the country. But again, nothing leads us to Molly. It wouldn't be until mid-2003 that there was a huge break in Molly's case.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
This episode of Voices for Justice is brought to you by Quince. I've been trying to be more intentional about what I wear each day. I'm leaning into pieces that feel effortless, comfortable, and still put together. And Quince has been my go-to. The fabrics feel elevated, the fits are flattering, and everything just works without overthinking it. They use premium materials like 100% European linen, organic cotton, and ultra-soft denim. And the best part? Everything is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for quality and craftsmanship, not brand markup. I recently just ordered their tiered linen dress, of course in black. I wanted to pair it with one of my favorite pairs of brown wedges. The problem was, I didn't have a brown purse. So I got that from Quince too. It's one of my favorite outfits. It's easy, effortless, and feels amazing, especially as we're getting a little bit warmer here in Phoenix. Refresh your everyday with luxury you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/justice for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/justice for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/justice. This break actually came from the case of 10-year-old Holly Perinian, who was taken from Sturbridge, just a few towns over from Warren. This happened in 1993, 7 years before Molly went missing. The connection here gave me goosebumps, because not only would Holly's case lead to a break in Molly's case, but there's also another connection. Heather recalls that when they heard about Holly's case in church way back in 1993, they'd been encouraged to write letters of support to the family, and Molly wrote one. Then when Molly went missing, the Perinians came forward with Molly's letter and to help the Bish family. This isn't the break in the case, just a crazy connection that I couldn't overlook. Imagine your kid is so thoughtful that they write a letter of support to a family whose child went missing and later goes missing herself. The irony is just too much. But I think it also shows what a thoughtful person Molly was. Unfortunately, Holly was later found deceased by hunters who came across her remains in the woods. Her case remains unsolved to this day. But this is where the break in Molly's case comes in. In 2003, a retired officer who worked on Holly's case comes to Warren for Molly's case because he believes there could be a connection. Both girls were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and both were taken from remote areas that weren't too far apart from each other. So the retired officer decides to talk to local hunters in Warren to see if they've seen anything suspicious. And one guy says, well, a few months ago, I saw something in the woods that I thought was kind of weird, but I didn't think much of it at the time. And this officer is like, please take me to this place. This area is pretty desolate and apparently only really known to local hunters, but it wasn't far from where Molly went missing. When they get to this area, the hunter shows the officer what he saw. It's a piece of a blue bathing suit, the same color bathing suit that Molly was wearing when she went missing. They actually end up taking this piece of bathing suit, splitting it apart, and sending it to 2 different labs. While they're waiting for the results, they of course launch a huge search of 500 acres of this super dense forest area. 6 days into the search, the test results come back. It was Molly's bathing suit. Unfortunately, they weren't able to find any other DNA on the suit, but they continue to search the area. And a few weeks later, they find 26 bones belonging to Molly Bish. They were ultimately found about 5 miles away from Cummings Pond and only 2.5 miles from Molly's home. On August 2nd, 2003, on what would have been Molly's 20th birthday, the Bish family is finally able to lay her to rest at a ceremony honoring her life. Her bones were put into a children's casket and then into a larger casket. She was buried with her prom dress, a tiger stuffed animal, and a slew of items and letters from her friends and family. Although the family finally had answers as to whether or not Molly was still alive, they still had no solid evidence telling them who killed her. While the police continued to investigate, the Bish family decided to carry on Molly's legacy through helping others. On May 25, 2004, Maggie and John Bish created the Molly Bish Foundation. According to their website, they aim to, quote, spread the knowledge and understanding of child and family safety and promote legislative reform. Our mission and goals are achieved through legislative advocacy and educational presentations, end quote. I cannot stress how much this family has done for other families of missing and murdered children. These types of events can absolutely rip families apart. It happens all the time. But the Bish family really came together for Molly and for other families. They offered ID kits for hundreds of kids. They brought the Amber Alert to Massachusetts. They have provided countless hours of police training and so much more. Here is Heather elaborating on these efforts.
It really just started with the police asking us for a good head and shoulders picture of Molly. And we didn't have it. My parents didn't even know where the camera was by that point. So we felt like when we learned that 1 in 6 children is recovered with a good photo, that sort of became our way to educate and help others. We didn't know the statistics. We didn't know that how many sex offenders lived in our area. We just didn't know any of those things. And knowing that, sort of arms you with, sort of the impetus to have to do something. If you know, then you can't unknow something. And so you have to sort of move forward. And we didn't really have control of the investigation. I mean, from the beginning, they didn't look for Molly for 3 hours. The fire department thought she drowned. They blamed, her running away. They blamed the boyfriend. They spent so much time chasing, the wrong things that we didn't have any control of that. And the only thing we could control is how we could help others. And, it just started with that. We thought other families needed to know if there was a guy out there stealing kids, then everybody needed to know how to protect their children. And it sort of started with that concept and grew, because then we started learning about the criminal justice system. And my mom and I are both teachers, so we come from a system that works together. We have the autism specialist and the gym teacher and the third grade teacher all in a room together coming up with plans for children. So we're used to working together. And the criminal justice system doesn't exactly work that way. And there's a lot of egos, there's a lot of not playing in the sandbox together. And so we tried to not get angry about that, but to try to support change in those dynamics. So, my father would sponsor law enforcement officers to go down to the National Center for training, because law enforcement isn't really trained in missing persons cases. In fact, municipal police today are still not trained in how to respond to a missing child. So it's kind of scary. I mean, that's in Massachusetts. It's kind of scary, and it's been 20 years, and so we don't know. It's really up to the level of the department on what they know about how to react to a missing child. And I think some towns in Massachusetts do a good job, and others could certainly use the improvement. But it really started out with how can we support improvement, because there wasn't much that we could do to change their minds or to tell them what to do. And so it kind of started with how can we help them get smarter. It's kind of like don't work harder, work smarter kind of concept. And so it started with trainings and advocacy, and then it developed into legislation. And my parents helped bring the Amber Alert program to Massachusetts. They were there when the Adam Walsh Act was signed by President Bush. They worked on numerous initiatives. And it was different for John and I. I mean, I was 23 when my sister disappeared, and John was 19. We were just developing like who we were and what we stood for and what our what our life was going to be. So we didn't really get that 20s, that you kind of have that self discovery, and we kind of just followed our parents' lead, and we would have these what we would call fragile Fridays. And no matter where we were, we'd meet at this little diner in the next town, and we'd have fried fish or whatever. And they had these old fashioned candy machines, and my daughter would beg for candies. And sometimes we wouldn't talk about anything, and other times we would have so much to discuss. And there most of the times we weren't in the same place. We were often on our own journey of grief and making sense of this, but we always came together. And I think that's sort of what kind of kept our family together in some ways. I mean, it's certain that John and I have felt some abandonment issues when our parents were swept away from losing Molly. And there's certainly some family pain and suffering that has happened, but we have maintained being able to stay together. And even now my parents come down and visit me. I moved about 2 hours away from home, and they come out about once a month. And I get back to see my brother and his children every so often. But it started with them showing us what to do.
While Maggie and John Bish ran the foundation, Molly's case continued on. For almost 3 years, the police presented information on Molly's case to a grand jury, presenting multiple potential perpetrators. On December 23, 2006, the grand jury convened, determining that there wasn't enough evidence to convict anyone in Molly's case. John Bish Sr. told the Boston Globe that while the family hoped for an arrest in the case, quote, "We are grateful for the work that the grand jury has done. It has served to preserve testimony that has been collected by the state police, the leads, and evidence that they had," end quote. Unfortunately, in 2007, John Bish suffered from a stroke and had to take a back seat in Molly's investigation and the Molly Bish Foundation.
Unfortunately, my father had a stroke in 2007, and it was really a bad stroke, and he lost his periphery vision and his short-term memory, and he has what you call left side neglect. And but the amazing thing from that was that my dad, before the stroke, had carried this weight of having lost Molly. He was the father, he was a probation officer. He felt the weight of that, really strongly. And after the stroke, it sort of vanished. I mean, he knew Molly disappeared. He was sad about it, but he just wants to be with his family. He's just happy to sit by the window, having a coffee, looking at the birds, and being together. It almost released him from that burden and allowed him to still live with us, so we could still experience having a dad and a grandfather. But it did change my life, and I sort of inherited the investigation and the foundation and the political work. My mom was really busy working, taking care of my dad, and she was working, and so it sort of fell to my shoulders. And I was, just like you in the beginning, very committed to screaming from every mountain and looking under every rock and trying to find my sister. I also put up billboards, and I took out newspaper ads in almost every newspaper in Massachusetts. I've put flyers in every single town in Massachusetts. I've worked with different private investigators. I've held tip campaigns. I've tried everything that I could possibly think of to sort of shake that tree and get that missing piece of information.
While Heather was taking over the responsibilities of Molly's case and the foundation, there would be a major break in Molly's case when a man all the way in Florida was arrested. In 2009, Rodney Stanger was arrested and charged with the murder of his girlfriend, Crystal Morrison. When Crystal's sister Bonnie went to collect her items from Rodney's home, not only did she find items that appeared to belong to younger girls, but she also found a Massachusetts license with a picture of a much younger Rodney on it. a much younger Rodney that looked a lot like the sketch of the man in the white car. When investigators took a closer look at Rodney Stanger, they realized that he was an avid hunter and fisherman who lived in the area when Molly went missing. He was actually even born in Warren. Rodney also has a history of violence and drug abuse. And although he never owned a white car matching the description Maggie Bish gave the police, his brother did. Rodney was also in his late 50s, which would go right along with Maggie's description of the man at the pond. After seeing the sketch, Rodney's ex-wife is 90% sure that he was involved with Molly's death. However, Rodney Stanger has never been named a suspect in Molly's case. Heather expressed some concern to me over a pretty crazy loose end involving Rodney that the police failed to investigate until the media got involved.
We had a person of interest named Rodney Stanger in Florida, and I kept asking. I had found out that he was in jail, and he had lived in a trailer, and that nobody had ever searched the trailer. And I was like, I mean, we had this guy for over a year in our sort of periphery, and Fox News ended up going down to this trailer and looking around, and like maybe an hour or two after Fox News got there, the state police, had shuffled down there. But they had a picture of this guy from April of 2000, right before Molly disappeared, a fishing license that looked exactly like the sketch. None of this stuff could hold up in court because the time had gone by so much and the evidence could have been tampered with. Anyone could have went into that trailer. But the fact that they had missed that ball again, and that was like 10 years after Molly disappeared, was incredibly disheartening. But I watched them miss so many balls. And I guess that's the choice that victims have to make. You either go down that tunnel and scream, or you try to find another path and know that what you're doing and what you're saying is a normal emotional reaction to the behavior of people that aren't actually being authentic, aren't actually being trustworthy, aren't actually being, responsible. And that is probably the hardest thing. I think I've definitely developed huge trust issues from the state police. I think that has been the hardest part of this journey, besides the actual loss of my sister, is having to deal with this incredibly toxic system.
Rodney Stanger is currently serving a 25-year sentence for killing Crystal Morrison and is set to be released in 2031. I wasn't able to find any statements from Rodney Stanger regarding Molly Bish, but his lawyer has said that his client is innocent until proven guilty. Like John Bish Sr. told reporters, there are almost too many persons of interest in Molly's case. Was it Rodney Stanger? Was it the park commissioner who bought the rope and duct tape? Was it Steve Lucas? There are a ton of theories, rogue cops obsessed with the case, there are leads from all over the country. The bottom line is we just don't know.
What they did to your family, you're lucky to make it out alive.
Streaming on Peacock.
These men are going to come after me. Taking them out is my only chance.
Put a bullet in her head.
From the co-creator of Ozark.
Looks like a family was running drugs.
Execution-style killing, it's rare for the Keys. Any leads on who they might have been running for?
The cartel killed my family. I'm gonna kill them. All of them.
MIA. Streaming now. Only on Peacock.
Stitch Fix. Stop shopping, get styled. A+ on the outfit, Miss Turner. You are about to slay parent-teacher conferences.
Oh, these? Just the most perfect fitting jeans my stylist sent me.
Oh, hello, you, who didn't set one foot in a mall and still looks amazing.
Just share your size, style, and budget, and your stylist sends personalized looks right to your door. Stitch Fix. Get started today at stitchfix.com. To my stylist, this look is dedicated to you. Thank you. Thank you.
Heather told me that several people have unrightfully claimed to solve Molly's case. One of the last updates I was able to find online was about a car that was supposedly buried not too far from where Molly went missing, and that some clothing had been found nearby. When I asked Heather if there were any updates on this, I was disgusted, but unfortunately not shocked by what she told me.
No, that was a really sad situation. Again, like I had mentioned, and I don't think we touched on this, but I had mentioned that I had worked with several different private investigators over the years, and, you know, I was glad and happy that people would come forward and try to help me, especially after my father had his stroke, and, he was sort of leading those efforts, and again, he was at least sort of in the field of criminal justice. I'm a teacher over here. I don't even have, you know, the slightest idea, at least my dad, I felt like, had some. So I was really grateful when a few of them came forward. I would say of all of them that I've worked with, probably only one was authentic. The rest of them were looking for media attention or some sort of popularity. One was starring on Nancy Grace, and they would find these people of interest, and then they would like sort of slam the door and say, "That's it, I solved it, Heather." And I would say, "Well, we don't have an arrest, and you know this looks really good circumstantially, but we need more." And they would say, "Well, you might never get that, Heather, and you just have to settle, this is the person." And I could never do that because it wasn't 100%, and I want 100%. I don't want to blame someone for my sister's murder that didn't do it. And I mean, I'll certainly look at all these people, and it's really scary how many people fit that profile and were in the area and did do bad things. Um, but I felt like it was irresponsible for them to sort of say that they solved Molly's murder, and they sort of open and shut the case themselves. And that's sort of how the police kind of were. I mean, for us, very early, they were very tunnel vision. We would bring forward our concerns from people that we knew that were around Molly, and they would say, "Nope, we're looking at this person, or we're doing this." Like, especially for Molly's boyfriend. I mean, that kid was like crucified in the media, and he was just a kid. I mean, 16-year-old kid, came from a troubled family, didn't have support networks in place, and had to deal with a huge crime, and in a context where his father, was selling weed out of the house. And how do you deal with that? You get the police like ready to arrest you, and they you don't have support, you don't have anyone. So it really made me sad and kind of scared that they would go after someone like that. And some of them still think of him in this context. But you know the car was brought up by another private, well, she wasn't even a private investigator. She was actually a volunteer in our foundation. When I first met her, she was in college. She went on to get her doctorate in forensics or criminology or something, and then came back to our area and was like, "I really want to help you. Now my father had the stroke and I was doing this on my own." She had this great background. She did these behavior profiles. It was really interesting. She helped me run these tip campaigns, and then she kind of went off on her own and was like really obsessed with this particular suspect or person of interest, and that led to the car in the cemetery. She had organized this search, and I actually had to be at my daughter's orientation in college, and I was like, "I can't really be there. Are you sure you're going to be able to handle this? Because the media gets here, it's going to be a nightmare." Well, and we were trying to do this under the cuff to just see. I mean, what are the chances a car is going to be buried in a campground? I don't really know the odds on that, but I'm thinking, they're not really high. So, um, she ended up doing this whole thing, and the media came, and it became a mess. And she lied. And the person who came from the University of Connecticut to do the sonar testing disappeared, and none of us got reports on what was there. They didn't find anything, but they acted like there might be something there, but they didn't have any evidence to prove that. She later wrote a book, and in this book, she claims to have solved Molly's case, and she claims to have found Molly's clothing in the area Molly disappeared. That clothing was ruled out as not being Molly's. My family ruled it out, the police ruled it out, yet she continued to develop her own narrative, saying that was, she had done all this work. So, I think, again, victims' families are vulnerable to people that, maybe are working out their own psychological issues or their own egos, and take advantage of families. Certainly, that's what these past people will do. And I'm not even going to bring up their names because I'm not even going to give them the credit. That's how meaningless they've been to me. They, you know, yeah, I can't explain the level of betrayal, I guess, that a family goes through initially with the loss and the of the victim, and then dealing with the police and again that sort of toxic behavior, and then being taken advantage of by people. And I've known other victim families that have been taken advantage of by the media. That has not been my experience, but certainly the people who sort of mask or pretend that they're private investigators or are private investigators, they have certainly taken advantage of my family. So the car, nothing. There's nothing with that. That didn't lead to anything. That was really a waste of very much time.
Heather is still very active in Molly's case, but unfortunately, the police have become less transparent with her, especially surrounding the topic of DNA evidence, and the new detective doesn't really seem to have a grasp on the case just yet.
My detective currently doesn't know anything about the beginning of my sister's case and cannot answer any questions for me. It's almost embarrassing for him, I would think, and incredibly frustrating for me. And I don't believe he will solve this case. I think it's going to be someone that's doing a podcast, someone that comes forward with information, or, hopefully science. But I don't think it's going to be detective work because it's been lazy. It's been not cohesive.
Of course, I did have to ask Heather, where is Molly's case today?
Well, it is with an investigator. Apparently, we have an unresolved case unit in Massachusetts that's been formed in the state police that's separate than. So in our cases, they're held by the district attorney in each county. So we don't have sheriffs like in other states. So there's a separate unit in the state police. They're supposed to be working on these cases, but I've yet to find out what exactly they're doing in the 2 years that they've existed. So that's there's not much. I'm hoping with the familial DNA that we'll get some traction, but I'm dealing with an investigator that has little knowledge of my case, and it's actually frustrating to talk to him half the time. So we're kind of no closer than we were from the beginning. We've had a number of suspects. We've sort of got as much as we could out of them. I think we're just in a place where we need that one piece, or we need some science.
But like I said, Heather is still working on Molly's case and working at the Molly Bish Foundation to help other families. She has 2 pretty big initiatives right now. First, she's taken to TikTok to spread awareness about Molly's case. This particular video has almost 150,000 views since she posted it about a month ago.
To the man responsible for the abduction and murder of my sister Molly Bish. Every year, my family makes a plea via the media for you to come forward and have a change of heart. It's coming on 21 years now, and I'm getting real tired of waiting for you to stop being a coward. I want you to know I'm coming for you. I will not stop. I will not stop finding ways to find you. I will use science. I will use technology. I will use my voice. I will not stop screaming from the mountaintops for justice for Molly. I will not be giving up. Not in my lifetime, and I will outlive you. So before you meet your maker, come forward, give up, turn yourself into the Mass State Police, or keep waiting in your prison. As I get closer and closer, I'm coming for you. I'm coming.
The other huge initiative that Heather is trying to push right now is a bill that would help law enforcement in Massachusetts use DNA to find partial familial matches in CODIS. Here is Heather explaining a bit more about the bill on her TikTok account.
Recently, I've been working on this familial DNA bill. Familial DNA would allow law enforcement to use CODIS, the
system that keeps all our felons and search it for a family member that might have committed this crime with an unidentified DNA sample from the crime scene. This is science and it works. Please help me and ask your legislator to vote for Senate Bill 1595 in Massachusetts. Thank you.
This bill could not only potentially help solve Molly's case, but also many others in Massachusetts. This type of policy already exists in several other states. In my opinion, the more that adopt it, the better. There's so much DNA out there tied up by privacy concerns. We saw the same thing in the yogurt shop murders in Texas. I cannot imagine having a family member that was missing or murdered, having DNA and not being able to use it to its full potential. Which leads me right to our call to action. If you have any tips related to the disappearance and murder of Molly Bish, please call the tip line at 508-452-7575. And if you are in the Massachusetts area, please contact your legislator and ask them to support S1595. If you visit mollybishfoundation.com, you will see an entire list of Massachusetts state legislators. So if you do live in the area, please take a moment to contact them. I have one last call to action right from me. If you do use TikTok, please go give Heather a follow. Her username is Heather K. Bish. If you enjoyed or found my passionate content about Alyssa on TikTok interesting, I know that you'll feel the same about Heather's. Molly's story is obviously absolutely tragic. But I think it's beautiful the way that Molly's legacy truly lives on through Heather, Maggie, John Sr., John Jr., and the countless families that they've affected.
Like I said, I think love's in action. And I can feel my sister's love when, like for example, there was an Amber Alert in Western Massachusetts last year, and they were able to get the girl back after a couple hours. And, I called my mom and I said, that's because of you. All the work you did, all those phone calls, begging Ted Kennedy, talking to them about judicial oversight or whatever the contention was in that particular bill. You convinced them and you helped save that girl. And, the work that we've done in the foundation, we've never been able to sort of give data and say we've saved this many kids or we've prevented this many abductions. We could never say that because we'll never know. We just know that we're arming the people that will listen with tools to keep their children safe and the knowledge that, the world isn't as exactly safe as we thought it was or we hope that it is.
Like I said way back in the beginning of the episode, Heather is definitely one of my heroes. And I am one of those families that she and her family has positively affected. But as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Voices for Justice is hosted and produced by me, Sarah Turney. For more information about the podcast, to suggest a case, to see resources used for this episode, and to find out more about how to help the cases I discuss, visit voicesforjusticepodcast.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show in your podcast player. It really does help more people find the podcast and these cases in need of justice.